Hello, so my name is Arlen.
My name is Airam.
And our topic that we'll be presenting today is police brutality, and specifically just in America.
And we will most likely be focusing on minorities. And first and foremost, we would like to establish that we are not completely against the law enforcement system. I just think it's important to address some issues that are quite vital if we want to make things work here.
And these issues that have been an ongoing issue throughout America ever since the civil rights movement, even to now. And it should be an issue that not just minorities should know, but the whole world should know, because this is an issue that many people have been going through, and there hasn't really been a solution in order to resolve this issue.
So, defining police brutality. So, police brutality is any circumstances when a law enforcement officer uses excessive amount of force over an individual. Usually, it's without actual valid cause, and in many instances, it's usually can lead to death. It's usually in an effort to overpower the individual when they feel as though they do not have control over the situation.
And police brutality is just not using excessive force, and it doesn't have to be physically, but it can also be emotionally, verbally. So it's trying to make the other individual inferior to the police officer's authority.
In these types of situations, their rights are usually compromised. They're not, when speaking about the individual, they're usually not aware that they have the right to speak up, and it's usually done in an effort to undermine the person.
So there's this quote that we looked up, which says, "There is an implicit racial association of Black Americans with dangerous or aggressive behavior." So it's basically describing how they always try to place a stereotype by stating that African Americans are dangerous and that they're aggressive, because of how America has identified them. And so it's just, and this image describes how you see an African American and a Caucasian. You see you see an African American about to be pulled over by a police officer, which is illustrating how the racism that still continues on. And even though they tried to resolve some issues passing many laws throughout in the 1900s, this issue is still continuing on, and there's always racism no matter what.
So this leads on to the first factor that we believe plays a role in police brutality, which is racial profiling. Racial profiling tends to lead officers into believing that a certain race has to be sought after. It targets them. It makes it seem as though they will always be the one at fault in a certain situation. Many officers have actually accepted to using racial profiling as a way to seek after a person when it comes to a crime. It's been used throughout the years, and although it's not obvious that it's racism, when interviewing many and reading through cases, some of the most the pushback as to why they sought that person was because they thought that they looked suspicious because of their appearance, and it usually tends to be somebody from a minority group in an urban area.
So as Airam stated, racial profiling. So it's when a law enforcement it tries to target an individual based on their race or ethnics and how they are, and it's just not their ethnics, but also based on religion. So in this case, an example would be the Muslims, because throughout the years since 9/11, the Muslims have been identified as terrorists, and so whenever Muslims whenever they see a Muslim, they always identify them as a terrorist. If it's ethnicity, usually a minority, which is African American or Latinos, and they use this in order to have they do this so they can have a reason for officers to detain an individual because of how they are or their appearances or how they act in public. And this goes against the 14th Amendment, which is the Equal Protection Amendment, in which everyone has been given everyone is equal no matter what. And placing this racial profiling is also describing how it's mostly used against minorities, and it's also describing how how they're not, and it's also describing how officers are just displaying, they're just using stereotypes or anything that they hear about these certain ethnicities, and they use it against them because that's how it's always been most of the time.
So one case in the 90s was Amadou Diallo. He was a 24-year-old man who was shot 41 times by 4 police officers in Bronx, New York. In the end, 4 officers were not indicted, but their reasoning was that they were looking for a certain individual that fit the appearance of Amadou, and he was shot 41 times. Later on, when they were analyzing the case, they would try to find reasons as to why Amadou's death was, in a way, valid. They try to say that he was previously involved with certain gangs or that he had some drug activity going on. But in reality, that was actually irrelevant to the actual situation and his death. So his entire situation could have been actually was almost not necessary because he simply fit the appearance of another man.
Another case of racial profiling is, of course, if you guys heard the latest, from I believe 2 years ago, was the Michael Brown case, and when in Ferguson when an officer shot African American a young adolescent because of how he appeared and when he came up to him, and by reading several articles and looking over several sources, we found out that the Justice Department actually is suing Ferguson because Ferguson Police Department, whenever they would pull over anyone from that specific area, which is predominantly minorities, they would deprive them of their rights. They wouldn't state their Miranda rights. They wouldn't tell them you have this certain right. So they're not telling the due process from the 4th Amendment to the 8th Amendment, which is also a constitutional right that police officers must do. So they're not following their rules. They're not doing what they should be doing, and it's also leading to racial profiling because they know that these minorities do not know their certain rights, even though that they should be told because that's what it says in and not just in the Constitution, but it also says in police officers, in their certain laws, they have to state the Miranda rights to an individual, and so this is also stating how racial profiling plays an issue because minorities don't have a reason to defend themselves because they don't know their rights.
So moving on, we will be talking about institutionalized racism as another reason, as a way to address racism that exists within our own law enforcement systems and our own justice systems. Although it's not quite obvious, it's still there. There's discrimination against minorities. Many minorities are given a disadvantage as opposed to their white counterparts when it comes to issues involving legal issues or against other police officers. There's an alienation in a way that many other issues are ignored. Communities like these are not taught their rights. They're not able to know that they do have rights and they can actually exercise them and that they have the right to use them. And they're at a disadvantage in the sense that police officers are usually given more credibility when it comes to cases like these. They will usually believe the officer instead of the person that was involved with the situation. So that gives you an example of how just because they have a badge or because they have that specific title, they are given some type of disadvantage, even though it's not always right.
So here's this quote that from Professor Michelle Alexander. She stated that the stigma of criminality functions in much the same way as Jim Crow, creating legal boundaries between them and us, allowing legal discrimination against them, moving the right to vote for millions, essentially warehousing a disposable population of the unwanted people. So it's describing how how the system it's obviously it's corrupted throughout the time period because no matter what they try to do in order to give minorities a chance to defend themselves or a chance to be as equal as as the white communities, no matter what circumstances they try to develop, it's always saying that that these laws, no matter what, that officers is always going to have the more authority over the minorities, and it'll also show that minorities do not have certain way to defend themselves in order from a police officer. So.
In the same way, it explains how, by using legal discrimination, it's telling us that this discrimination, although it's not exactly obvious, because it is part of our legal systems, it's happening, and not many people are aware of it because of the trust that is put in them. So, we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union.
This right here, as we learned like in our government class, these are called like the due process. These are the rights that people may hold, so they can use them while they are detained or while they are in court. So obviously, the Fourth Amendment.
It's 8:15.
The Fourth Amendment is basically to prohibit officers from doing a search and seizure into like your private possessions. So if you're in a car, obviously an officer cannot enter your car unless you give him the right to. So and speaking about all these amendment rights, these are all the rights that minorities can use to defend themselves from officers. But if they're not told like the Miranda rights, they're not told what certain rights that they can use. How do you expect them to defend themselves if they don't even know what they can do? Like with protection from self-incrimination, the people have a right to remain silent. They don't have to speak to an officer. So if an officer gets very upset that you're not speaking, it's because you have the right to remain silent. You don't have to speak because whatever you say could go into the court, and they could use that against you. And so if the minorities don't understand what this means, what if the minorities don't understand what this means? It's just showing how minorities don't have a reason. They don't have a way to protect themselves because they can't. They think that they have to speak to officers. Whatever they ask them, they have to stay silent. But no, they have the right to remain silent. And all these, and especially the Eighth Amendment, which prevents like governments from doing excessive bail accrual punishment. In these jails, they are always punished for whatever they do. There's always these certain things that happen, and so this is why everyone should know these rights in order to protect themselves from these things.
So these are some statistics we found on our website. It counts the amount of deaths that have happened in the last 2 years and this year, and this number actually keeps moving on. There's only 1% indictment when it comes to situations where it's a police officer and another citizen. And these are more statistics of police officers who have actually accepted to use an excessive force or witnessing it and not doing anything about it. So we believe that a crime is a crime, whether you have a badge or any type of legal authority. There still has to be justice. You can't let crimes like these go away without any type of justice for the person, because in many situations it's an innocent person who's losing their life, or somebody who did not commit a crime, and simply because of their appearance or the group that they belong to, they're not getting any justice that they deserve, and these officers are getting away with it. And unfortunately, it's our own communities, it's our own people that we could know, or people that we did know once, and it's happening all over the U.S. There hasn't been much to do. So I see that it's important for us to teach each other and help each other as a community, let each other know that we do have rights and we do have the ability to exercise them, and that we do have a voice, and not just because somebody's in a position of authority, you have to let yourself, especially when you know that you're right.
That's it. Thank you for your time.